I never expected my midlife crisis to involve a stolen boat, a power-hungry HOA president, and a felony conviction. But life has a funny way of surprising you. The morning I discovered my boat was missing from Harborview Marina in San Diego started like any other Saturday. I'd planned a day on the water, hoping to clear my head after another heated email from our neighborhood's notorious HOA president, Brenda Fletcher. At 49, she wielded her clipboard and rulebook like weapons of mass destruction against anyone who dared to plant unapproved flowers or paint their mailbox the wrong shade. "She's gone," I muttered, staring at the empty slip where my 32-foot Catalina sailboat, Serenity, should have been docked. I checked my phone, thinking maybe I'd forgotten about some maintenance work, but there were no messages from the marina. Just another notice from Brenda about improper trash can placement. "Excuse me," I called to the dockmaster who was passing by. "My boat's missing from slip B12. Dave, who'd been running Harborview for over a decade, looked puzzled. "Wade, I saw your boat just yesterday." "Are you sure you didn't move it?" "Positive. I haven't been here since Tuesday." His brow furrowed as he checked his clipboard. "There's no scheduled maintenance. Let me check the security footage." While Dave disappeared into his office, I paced the dock, trying to make sense of this. Serenity wasn't just any boat, she was my escape, my sanctuary after my divorce 3 years ago. I'd poured my savings into her, not to mention countless weekends of restoration work. When Dave returned, his expression told me everything before he even spoke. "You're not going to believe this," he said, shaking his head. "The cameras caught a group of people boarding your boat yesterday around 2 p.m. They had some paperwork they showed. My assistant claimed they had authorization to move it." "Authorization from who?" I demanded. "That's the thing," Dave said grimly. "They had documents with a Sunset Cove HOA letterhead." My blood ran cold. Sunset Cove was my neighborhood, and Brenda Fletcher ran that HOA like her personal fiefdom. "That's impossible. The HOA has no jurisdiction over marina property." "I know that, and you know that," Dave replied, "but my new weekend assistant didn't. He said the paperwork looked official and they had keys. I had a spare set in my garage. It wasn't hard to figure out how they got them." 2 months ago, Brenda had conducted one of her infamous safety inspections, which mostly consisted of her looking for violations in people's homes and garages. "I'm calling the police," I said, pulling out my phone. While waiting for the harbor police to arrive, I scrolled through my HOA emails. Nothing about boat violations or repossessions. The last notice I'd received was about my lawn being a 1/4 inch too tall and a warning about the small American flag I had displayed in my front yard. Apparently, it wasn't the approved size. Officer Miguel Rodriguez arrived within 20 minutes, his San Diego Harbor Police boat pulling alongside the dock. "So you're saying your homeowners association stole your boat?" he asked, his pen hovering over his notepad. "Yes, and I want to file a theft report immediately." "Does the HOA have any legal claim to your vessel?" "Absolutely not," I insisted. "I'm current on my marina fees, the boat is properly registered, and the HOA has zero authority over marina property. This is grand theft, plain and simple." Officer Rodriguez nodded, jotting notes. "I'll need the boat's registration, proof of ownership, and any documentation about your interactions with this HOA. I can send you 3 years of ridiculous violation notices," I said, "but none of them mention my boat." After taking my statement and a copy of Serenity's documentation, Officer Rodriguez assured me they would begin searching immediately. "We'll check the nearby marinas first. A 32-foot Catalina isn't exactly inconspicuous." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my neighbor, Tom Harper. He'd moved in 6 months ago and had already accumulated 17 HOA violations, mostly for his aggressive gardening practices, which meant growing vegetables in his front yard. "Brenda's finally gone too far," Tom said, sipping his beer. "Taking someone's boat, that's criminal." "She's getting desperate," I replied. Ever since the last board meeting when half the neighborhood showed up to protest her new aesthetic guidelines for holiday decorations. You know who might know something? Terry Villanueva, the former treasurer. She resigned from the board after that huge fight with Brenda last month. I remembered that explosive meeting. Terry had accused Brenda of misappropriating HOA funds for personal use, though nothing was ever proven. Good call. I'll talk to her tomorrow. The next morning, I was brewing coffee when my phone rang. It was Officer Rodriguez. "Mr. Farrell, we've located your boat." I nearly dropped the phone. "Where?" "That's the interesting part. It's docked at a private residence on Coronado Island. The property belongs to a Brenda Fletcher." My jaw clenched. "That's her. That's my HOA president. We need you to come down and verify it's your vessel before we can proceed." 30 minutes later, I was aboard a harbor police boat heading toward Coronado Island. As we approached the channel leading to the private docks behind the multi-million-dollar homes, I spotted Serenity immediately, her distinctive navy blue hull and white cabin unmistakable. "That's her," I said, pointing. "That's my boat." Officer Rodriguez nodded to his partner, who maneuvered their boat toward a dock where a woman in a pink polo shirt and white capri pants was frantically waving her arms. "You have no right to be here. This is private property," she shouted as we approached. Even from a distance, I recognized Brenda's perfectly highlighted bob and perpetual scowl. She looked like she was about to have an aneurysm as the harbor police boat docked. Officer Rodriguez stepped onto the dock. "Madam, we're responding to a report of a stolen vessel." "That's ridiculous." Brenda snapped. "The association acquired this boat legally for community use." I stepped onto the dock behind Rodriguez. "That's a lie, Brenda. You stole my boat." Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Wade Farrell, you're trespassing on private property. I'll have you arrested." "Actually, madam," Officer Rodriguez interrupted, "we have documentation showing this vessel belongs to Mr. Farrell." "Can you provide proof of ownership transfer?" Brenda's face flushed. "Of course I can." The HOA voted to claim this vessel as compensation for Mr. Farrell's numerous violations and unpaid fines. "And you have legal documentation of this transfer of ownership?" Rodriguez asked skeptically. "Aye, it's in my home office." "The HOA has authority. The HOA has no authority over Marina property or to seize private property without a court order," I interjected. "Mr. Farrell is correct," Officer Rodriguez said. "Without proper documentation, this appears to be a case of grand theft." As the reality of her situation dawned on her, Brenda's demeanor changed. "This is all a misunderstanding. The board voted to use association funds to rent a boat for our community day. I must have mistaken this boat for the rental." "So you accidentally took a specific boat from a specific slip using keys you happen to have?" I challenged. Brenda's eyes darted between me and the officers. "I'll call my attorney." While Brenda made her call, I boarded Serenity to assess any damage. Everything looked intact, though someone had replaced my sailing gear with champagne glasses and a cooler full of expensive wine. A banner reading "Sunset Cove HOA Executive Cruise" was folded on one of the seats. Officer Rodriguez joined me on board. "Sir, we're going to need to process this as a crime scene. Based on the evidence and your documentation, we'll be arresting Miss Fletcher for grand theft of a vessel, which is a felony in California." I watched as his partner read Brenda her rights on the dock. Her perfectly coiffed hair seemed to deflate as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She glared at me with such venom that I half expected to burst into flames. "This isn't over, Wade," she yelled as they escorted her to the police boat. "The association will sue you for defamation." After giving my official statement at the harbor police station, I was told I could reclaim Serenity the following day once they finished processing evidence. I called Tom to update him. "They arrested her?" he asked, incredulous, "in handcuffs and everything." "She was planning to use my boat for some kind of executive HOA cruise." "Holy shit, the whole neighborhood's going to explode when this gets out." He wasn't wrong. By evening, my phone was blowing up with texts and calls from neighbors. Some expressed shock and support, while others, mostly Brenda's loyal followers on the board, insisted it was all a misunderstanding, that I was blowing out of proportion. The next day, after reclaiming serenity and returning her to her proper slip, I decided to follow up on Tom's suggestion to speak with Terry Villanueva. I found her gardening in her front yard, a clear violation of Brenda's no visible manual labor policy. "Wade," she said, standing up and removing her gloves. "I heard about what happened. Come inside, we should talk." Terry's living room was bright and airy, decorated with colorful artwork that would have given Brenda palpitations. She poured us both iced tea and sat down with a heavy sigh. "I'm not surprised," she said. "Brenda's been out of control for months. What happened between you two? Everyone saw the blow-up at the meeting, but not what caused it." Terry took a long sip of her tea. "I found financial discrepancies. Money from our reserve fund was being used for what Brenda called executive expenses. When I questioned it, she claimed the board had approved special compensation for her extraordinary service. How much money are we talking about? Almost $40,000 over the past year. When I threatened to report it, she manufactured a scandal about my husband's business to discredit me." I whistled low. "That's why you resigned." I couldn't fight her and protect my family at the same time. "But I kept copies of everything, all the financial records, the unauthorized transfers, everything." "Have you gone to the police?" Terry shook her head. "I was afraid. Brenda has friends on the city council, connections with local judges, but after what she did to you, maybe it's time. You should talk to Officer Rodriguez. He's already building a case against her for stealing my boat." "I will," she said, determination hardening her features. "It's time someone stopped her." The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal activity. Brenda was formally charged with grand theft of a vessel, a felony that carried potential prison time. Her attorney attempted to have the charges reduced, arguing that as HOA president, she believed she had legitimate authority. The prosecutor wasn't buying it. Miss Fletcher exhibited clear intent by obtaining keys through deceptive means, falsifying documents to remove the vessel from its marina, and planning to use it for personal entertainment, he stated at the preliminary hearing. When Terry came forward with her financial evidence, additional charges of embezzlement and fraud were added. 3 other board members who had enabled Brenda's misappropriation of funds were also charged as accessories. The case quickly became the talk of not just our community, but the entire San Diego area. Local news ran stories about HOA gone wild and the pirate president of Sunset Cove. Several homeowners, emboldened by Brenda's arrest, came forward with their own stories of harassment and intimidation. 4 months after the theft, I testified at Brenda's trial. Sitting on the witness stand, I faced her directly for the first time since her arrest. She'd traded her designer outfits for a conservative gray suit, her flashy jewelry replaced by a simple strand of pearls, an attempt to appear more sympathetic to the jury. "Mr. Farrell," Brenda's attorney began, "isn't it true that you've had numerous violations of community standards over the years?" "I've received notices for alleged violations, yes." "And you've expressed hostility toward the association and my client specifically, have you not?" "I've disagreed with many of Ms. Fletcher's interpretations of the CC and Articus, as have many homeowners." "Objection," the prosecutor interrupted. "Previous HOA disputes are irrelevant to the charges of grand theft and embezzlement." "Sustained," the judge ruled. Brenda's attorney pivoted. "Mr. Farrell, isn't it possible that my client genuinely believed the association had authority to temporarily use your vessel for community purposes?" I looked directly at Brenda. "No, Miss Fletcher had previously inspected my home and saw my boat keys in my garage. She created fake documents to deceive Marina staff. After taking my boat, she docked it at her private residence, not community property, and she was planning a cruise for board members, not the community." Her attorney had no effective response. When Terry testified about the financial improprieties, she brought documentation showing how Brenda had diverted HOA funds to pay for personal vacations, spa treatments, and even her daughter's college tuition, all disguised as community improvement expenses. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning with their verdict, guilty on all counts. At the sentencing hearing 3 weeks later, Brenda finally spoke publicly. "I've dedicated years of my life to maintaining the standards and property values of Sunset Cove," she told the judge, her voice wavering. "Everything I did was for the good of the community." The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, was unmoved. "Miss Fletcher, you abused your position of trust to steal from your neighbors, harass homeowners who challenged you, and even commit grand theft of a vessel. Your actions reflect not community service but self-service." She sentenced Brenda to 3 years in state prison for the combined charges, with an additional requirement to pay restitution to the HOA and to me personally for damages and legal fees. As Brenda was led away by court officers, our eyes met briefly. There was no remorse in her gaze, only rage and the silent promise that somehow, someday, she'd make me pay for her downfall. With Brenda and her enablers removed from the board, our community called an emergency election. To my surprise, several neighbors nominated me to serve as the new president. "Absolutely not," I told them at the hastily organized community meeting in our local elementary school cafeteria. "I've seen what power does to people in that position." "That's exactly why you should do it," argued Martha Gonzalez, an elderly resident who had once been fined for having a bird feeder visible from the street. "You know how bad it can get." Despite my protests, I found myself elected to the board, though I refused the presidency. That honor went to Terry, who had demonstrated both integrity and courage in standing up to Brenda. Our first act as a new board was to commission a full audit of the HOA finances and create a more transparent system for handling complaints and violations. We also revised many of the more draconian rules Brenda had implemented over the years. "You know," Tom said to me as we celebrated the new board with a small gathering at my house, "you never would have caught her if she hadn't stolen your boat." "Some people can hide who they really are for a long time," I replied. "But eventually they get greedy or careless." 6 months after Brenda began serving her sentence, I received a letter from her attorney. She was suing me for defamation and seeking compensatory damages for the destruction of her reputation. My attorney assured me the lawsuit was frivolous. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims, but it was clear Brenda was determined to continue the fight from behind bars. As I sat on Serenity that weekend, watching the sun set over San Diego Bay, I reflected on how a simple love of sailing had led to exposing corruption that had affected so many lives. The boat that had once been my escape from stress had ironically thrust me into one of the most stressful situations of my life. Yet as I looked around at the peaceful Marina, I felt no regret. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected places, even from the calm waters of a harbor where a middle-aged man just wanted to sail away from his troubles for a few hours. 1 year after Brenda's conviction, we held a community picnic at the local park, something that would have been impossible under her reign, as she considered community gatherings disruptive to the aesthetic tranquility of the neighborhood. Children played freely on the grass. Dogs ran without receiving violation notices for unauthorized canine activities. And neighbors who had once avoided each other for fear of being reported now chatted freely. "Hard to believe how much has changed," Terry said, joining me at one of the picnic tables. "For the better," I agreed. "How are the association finances looking?" "We've recovered most of what Brenda embezzled through insurance and her restitution payments. And without spending thousands on her aesthetic enforcement officers, we actually have a surplus for the first time in years." "Any word on her appeal?" Terry shook her head. "Denied last week. Her attorney withdrew from the defamation case against you too. Apparently she couldn't pay his fees. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had terrorized homeowners over $50 fines was now facing financial ruin herself. Life at Sunset Cove gradually returned to normal, or rather, established a new normal. Under Terry's leadership, the HOA focused on actual community issues, maintaining common areas, organizing social events, and addressing legitimate safety concerns. Violations were handled with courtesy rather than threats, and homeowners were given reasonable time to address issues. I still received the occasional notice my grass did sometimes exceed the recommended height, but now they came as friendly reminders rather than ominous warnings of impending doom. 2 years into Brenda's sentence, I was at the Marina preparing Serenity for a weekend sail when Dave, the dockmaster, approached with an unusual request. "Wade, you remember that reporter who did the story on the HOA boat theft? She's doing a follow-up piece on HOA reform and wants to interview you, said it's become a statewide issue." The original news coverage had indeed sparked conversations beyond our community. Several state legislators were now considering bills to limit HOA powers and increase oversight of association finances. "Tell her I'll talk to her," I agreed. "But only if she interviews Terry too. She's the real hero in all this." The following week, I met with Sophia Chen, the investigative reporter who had covered Brenda's trial for the San Diego Tribune. We sat aboard Serenity, which seemed fitting given the boat's central role in the story. "Your case has become something of a catalyst," Sophia explained, setting up her recorder. "Since your story broke, there's been a 60% increase in complaints filed against HOAs in California, and 3 other states have introduced legislation modeled on California's proposed HOA Transparency Act." "I never wanted to be the face of HOA reform," I admitted. "I just wanted my boat back." "That's what makes your story compelling. You weren't an activist, you were just a homeowner who'd been pushed too far." She glanced around the boat. "Do you ever worry that she'll come after you when she gets out?" The question had crossed my mind more than once. Brenda wasn't the type to forgive or forget. "She'll be on probation for years after her release," I said. "And she's prohibited from serving on any HOA board again. Besides, I doubt she'll return to Sunset Cove." "Actually," Sophia said, checking her notes, "I interviewed her last month at the women's facility in Chowchilla. She insists she'll be returning to reclaim her community when she's released." That news sent a chill through me, despite the warm San Diego afternoon. "Did she seem changed by her experience?" Sophia gave me a knowing look. "Let's just say prison hasn't mellowed her perspective." "She still maintains she did nothing wrong and that the entire case was a conspiracy against her." After the interview, I called an impromptu meeting with Terry and several other board members. We met at my house, where I shared what I'd learned from Sophia. "She can't possibly think people would welcome her back," said Richard Oakes, our new treasurer. "Narcissists never truly understand how others perceive them," Terry said. "In her mind, she's the victim and we're the villains." "The question is," I said, "what do we do if she does come back?" We spent hours discussing possibilities. While we couldn't legally prevent her from returning to her home in Sunset Cove, which had been rented out during her incarceration, we could ensure that the changes we'd made to the community were solid enough to withstand any attempt to reclaim power. "The best defense is transparency," Terry concluded. "We keep doing what we're doing: open meetings, clear documentation, fair enforcement of reasonable rules." Her confidence was reassuring, but I couldn't shake my uneasiness. Brenda had managed to manipulate the system for years before she finally went too far. Who was to say she couldn't find new ways to cause trouble? As I approached the final year of my term on the board, I focused on cementing the positive changes we'd made. We revised the CC and Articus to require a supermajority vote for any rule changes, implemented term limits for board members, and created an independent review committee for violation appeals. During this time, Serenity became not just my personal retreat, but a community asset. I started a program taking veterans sailing on weekends, and occasionally hosted small fundraisers for local charities aboard the boat that had inadvertently changed so many lives. 2.5 years after her sentencing, the news we'd been anticipating arrived. Brenda had been granted early release for good behavior. She would return to San Diego in 3 weeks. The community reaction was mixed. Some residents, particularly newer ones who hadn't experienced her reign firsthand, didn't understand the concern. Others, who still bore the financial and emotional scars of her tyranny, expressed outright panic. "She can't hurt us anymore," I assured one particularly worried neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, who had once been fined $500 for having wind chimes. "The association has changed. We have protections in place now." "You don't know her like I do," the elderly woman insisted. "She holds grudges forever, and you, Wade, you're at the top of her list." The day before Brenda's scheduled release, I took Serenity out alone. The solitude of the open water had always helped me think, and I had a lot to process. As the coastline receded behind me, I considered how dramatically my life had changed since that fateful day when I discovered my boat missing. I had gone from an uninvolved homeowner to a reluctant community leader. I had made new friends, strengthened existing relationships, and even found purpose in helping reform an institution that affects millions of Americans. All because someone decided to steal my boat. When I returned to the marina that evening, Dave was waiting for me with an envelope. "This came for you while you were out," he said, handing it over. "Messenger delivered it, said it was urgent." The envelope had no return address, just my name typed on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words typed in bold: "I have not forgotten you." I showed the note to Terry the next morning. "It's intimidation, plain and simple," she said. "You should report this to her probation officer." "It's not signed," I pointed out. "There's no proof it's from her. Who else would it be from? Wade, don't underestimate her. This is how she operates, making people feel watched and threatened." I took her advice and contacted Brenda's probation officer, a no-nonsense woman named Gloria Martinez. She took the threat seriously. "This kind of behavior could violate the terms of her release," she explained. "I'll be having a conversation with Miss Fletcher today." That afternoon, the board held its monthly meeting at the community center. Attendance was higher than usual. News of Brenda's release had sparked renewed interest in HOA matters. We were discussing plans for repaving the community tennis courts when the door opened. Brenda Fletcher stood in the doorway, looking thinner than I remembered but with the same imperious expression. She had traded her prison uniform for a tailored pantsuit and pearl earrings. Her hair was freshly highlighted, and she carried her signature clipboard. The room fell silent as she walked to an empty chair in the back row. She sat down, crossed her legs, and smiled thinly at the stunned faces turned toward her. Terry recovered first. "Welcome, Miss Fletcher. As with all residents, you're welcome to observe our meetings." "How generous," Brenda replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm simply here to see how my community is being managed in my absence." Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I noticed Mrs. Abernathy clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Terry continued the meeting with remarkable composure, but everyone's attention remained fixed on our unexpected visitor. When the time came for public comments, Brenda was the first to raise her hand. "I'd like to address the board," she announced, standing and moving to the front of the room without waiting for permission. Facing the audience, she smiled that same cold, calculating smile I'd seen so many times before. "I want to thank the board for their efforts during my unfortunate absence. However, now that I've returned, I feel it's my duty to point out several concerning issues." For the next 10 minutes, she systematically criticized every change we'd implemented. The relaxed landscaping requirements were inviting rodent infestation. The community events were exposing us to liability, and the revised architectural guidelines were decimating property values. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke up. "Thank you for your comments, Miss Fletcher. We'll take them under advisement. However, I should remind you that as a condition of your release, you're prohibited from serving on the board or interfering with HOA operations." Her smile never wavered. "I'm simply exercising my right as a homeowner to express concerns. Wade, surely you, of all people, understand the importance of homeowner participation." The meeting concluded shortly after, with many residents hurrying out to avoid any potential confrontation with Brenda. She lingered, engaging a few of her former allies in hushed conversation. "Well, that was unsettling," Terry said as we gathered our materials. "She hasn't changed at all." "No," I agreed, "but the community has. Did you notice how few people engaged with her? 3 years ago, half the room would have been nodding along with everything she said." Over the next few weeks, Brenda's presence became a constant shadow over the community. She attended every HOA function, documented every minor maintenance issue, and submitted formal complaints about everything from the placement of the community bulletin board to the color of the newly repainted playground equipment. Her probation officer assured me she was monitoring the situation closely. "She knows she's walking a fine line," Gloria told me during one of our check-ins. "So far, she hasn't technically violated any conditions of her release." Then came the morning I discovered my car had been keyed overnight, a deep scratch running the entire length of both sides. The same day, Terry's mailbox was vandalized, and Tom found his garden destroyed, plants uprooted and strewn across his lawn. None of us could prove Brenda was responsible, though we all suspected it. When we reported the incidents to the police, they took reports but explained that without evidence or witnesses, there wasn't much they could do. "She's too smart to get caught," Tom said as we surveyed the damage to his garden. "This is psychological warfare. She wants us to know she can hurt us anytime she wants." I thought about the note I'd received, "I have not forgotten you," and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning breeze. The situation escalated when several homeowners received letters appearing to be from the board, announcing dramatic fee increases and new restrictions. The letterhead and formatting perfectly matched our official communications, but the content was designed to cause panic and anger. "It's forgery," Terry confirmed when panicked homeowners started calling. "We never sent these notices." We quickly sent out a community-wide email clarifying the situation, but the damage was done. Suspicion and uncertainty had been sown, exactly what Brenda wanted. The breaking point came when I returned to the Marina one evening to find Serenity's mooring lines cut and several windows smashed. A security camera had captured footage of someone in a hooded sweatshirt approaching my slip around 2 a.m., but their face wasn't visible. As I stood on the dock surveying the damage, Dave approached with a grim expression. "There's something else," he said, handing me a plastic evidence bag containing a pearl earring. "We found this caught on one of the cleats near your boat." I recognized it immediately as matching the pair Brenda had worn at the board meeting. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was something. Officer Rodriguez, who had investigated the original theft of my boat, took the new case seriously. "Given the history and this physical evidence, we have grounds to question Miss Fletcher," he assured me. "This pattern of escalating behavior is concerning." 2 days later, Brenda was brought in for questioning. She denied any involvement, claiming the earring must have been planted to frame her. However, her alibi for the night in question was weak, and a search of her home, authorized due to her probation status, revealed a notebook containing detailed information about board members' schedules and routines. More damning was the discovery of drafts of the fake HOA notices on her computer, along with research on how to cut boat mooring lines to cause delayed drifting. The evidence was enough for her probation officer to declare her in violation of her release conditions. Additionally, new charges were filed for vandalism, forgery, and attempted property damage. At her probation violation hearing, Brenda maintained her innocence, portraying herself as the victim of a community vendetta. The judge was unimpressed. Miss Fletcher, you were given an opportunity to re-enter society and demonstrate that you had learned from your mistakes, he said sternly. Instead, you have engaged in a calculated campaign of harassment and revenge. You will serve the remainder of your original sentence plus face these new charges upon completion. As she was led away by court officers, Brenda turned toward where I sat with Terry and several other board members. The hatred in her eyes was palpable, but beneath it, I glimpsed something else: defeat. The saga of Brenda Fletcher finally came to an end, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet community meeting where we discussed installing new playground equipment. Her house was sold, her possessions placed in storage, and her name became a cautionary tale in HOA management courses. 3 years after she first stole my boat, I stood on Serenity's deck watching the sunset over San Diego Bay. Tom and Terry were with me, along with several other neighbors who had become friends through our shared ordeal. Hard to believe it all started with this boat, Tom remarked, raising his glass in a toast. To Serenity, Terry said with a smile, the vessel that sank a tyrant. And to communities, I added, that stand together against abuse of power. As we sailed gently in the evening breeze, I reflected on the strange journey from victim to advocate. One woman's greed and hunger for control had inadvertently sparked a movement for HOA reform that was now spreading across the country. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected places, even from a simple sailboat that just wanted to be left in peace at its Marina slip. And sometimes, the greatest act of defiance against those who abuse power is simply to live well, sail freely, and remember that no matter how intimidating they may seem, no HOA president is above the law.